Hi, I'm Mayumi Tavalero, owner of Fork&Knife Creations, where I bring customized cooking classes to your kitchen. My in-home cooking classes will teach you how to cook creative, delicious, inexpensive meals, whatever your skill level is, all in the privacy and comfort of your own home. Today I'd like to welcome you to my kitchen where I'll be showing you how to do an Italian-inspired menu. We'll do a minestrone soup that's filled with wonderful, delicious vegetables. I'm going to show you how to do a chicken piccata, and I'm going to show you the secret to keeping the chicken very delicious and moist. We're also going to be doing a creamy saffron risotto that's very rich and colorful. And to finish things off, we're going to be doing a chocolate gelato, and it's going to be very easy because we're going to be doing it without eggs. We're going to start with our chocolate gelato since we need time for that to chill. And what I'm going to do first is, I've got 3 cups of half and half here. I'm going to add 1 cup of it to our saucepan. Now we're going to heat this up just until it's simmering. Meanwhile, what I'm going to do is I'm going to whisk our other ingredients together. We're going to be using 1 cup of granulated sugar. We'll use 1 cup of unsweetened cocoa. Make sure it is unsweetened. Then we're going to be using 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. Just give that a good whisk. Once your half and half has been brought to a simmer, we're going to slowly add that to our cocoa and sugar mixture. Keep stirring so that you don't get any lumps. And once we've added the 1 cup of half and half, go ahead and go around the edges so that all of the cocoa, the sugar, and the cornstarch gets incorporated. Now what we want to do is put our pan back on the stovetop, and we'll continue to heat the last 2 cups of the half and half. Now at this point, once our half and half gets a little bit warmer, we can add this mixture back into our pot. And this all ensures that our mixture stays lump-free. Now you also want to be whisking the whole time that this is pouring into the milk. What we're going to be doing here is, once this is all incorporated, we're going to bring it to a slight simmer. We're going to turn it down, and then we're going to let it cook for probably about 3 to 5 minutes, just until it thickens up. Our gelato mixture is now thickened up. Now most traditional ice creams are made with eggs, so you'll need to make a custard. This gelato is really easy because it's made without eggs and you won't have to go through that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shut this off, and I'm going to get some ice from the freezer. And I put it in a larger bowl than what we're going to put our mixture into. That way it can rest inside of here and cool off nice and quickly. We'll just pour this right back into the pan that we used. That looks nice and rich. And just stir it a few times just to cool it off additionally. Now we're going to place it right over our ice. This will help it cool down a lot quicker. And we'll just come back occasionally to give it a stir to make sure it's cooling nicely. Now we're ready to start our minestrone soup. Now we'll gather up our ingredients for our minestrone soup. We're going to be using some carrots, we're going to use celery, and also Swiss chard. Now we're going to be using, instead of a regular Swiss chard, a red Swiss chard, and that's going to add a lot of color to our soup. We're going to turn our soup pot on to about medium-high heat. And we're going to add about 3 tablespoons of olive oil. While that's heating, we are also going to heat a small pot for our pasta. We're going to be cooking our macaroni in that, and to the pasta water we want to add a generous amount of salt. And I always use kosher salt when I cook. It has a really clean taste and there's no anti-caking agents in it. I'm going to show you an easy way to dice an onion. First, we want to start by holding the onion like this with the root end on one side. We're going to cut off the top of the onion just like that. Flip it over so that the root end is up. Now what I want you to do is cut right down the middle of the onion, still leaving the roots attached, and then go ahead and set the onion down like that, just flat. Now if you want, at this point, you could cut off the root end if you feel pretty skilled about cutting an onion. If not, it's easier if you just peel it back just a bit, and that gives you something to hold on to. Come along this way, and if you want a 1/2 inch dice on your onion, just space it out a 1/2 inch apart. Then come back across it this way and then cut a 1/2 inch. Now we'll do that to the other side as well. Only this time I'll cut off the root end and then I'll go ahead and peel it. Remember, cut across this way. May be necessary to hold down the slices. They tend to want to stick to your knife. And then come back across a 1/2 inch. Okay, now I'm going to show you how we're going to do our garlic. We're going to use about 3 cloves of garlic for this. What I like to do first is just to cut off a little bit of that root end, because it could be kind of hard sometimes and it's just not a good texture. Sometimes that also makes it a lot easier to peel. If you're having trouble peeling it, then just place your knife on top of it, give it a little bit of a press, and then the rest of the skin will come off easily. I like to cut my garlic one at a time and then go back over it and then cut it much smaller. So we're going to start off like this, and we're just going to slice it lengthwise. Now the green part in the garlic is just a little bit of a sprout. Some people prefer to remove it, but you don't have to. Once you get it in a nice pile here, go ahead and bring your knife back across it. Now we're looking for not minced garlic here, but just chopped garlic. Okay, that looks to be about the right size. Our olive oil is now warm, so we're going to go ahead and add our diced onions. And then our chopped garlic. We're going to let that saute for about a couple minutes, and then we're going to move over to chop up the rest of our vegetables. We're going to be cutting up some celery next. And I like to use the inside of the celery, the heart of the celery. So I'm going to peel off my outer stalks. And of course you could reserve those for another use. But I'm going to get down into the heart of the celery. We're going to need about 2 stalks of celery, but because these are fairly small, I'm going to use this whole amount. And then we'll go ahead and chop the celery up, including the leaves. We're just going to cut this to about a 1/2 inch dice. And we'll add this to our pot. And then once again, give it a nice stir. What we also want to do too is check on our gelato. I'm gonna get our pre-frozen bowl out of our fridge. Now this is for a standard ice cream maker. We're gonna set that in here. You wanna have these frozen for at least 24 hours, and if not 24 hours, even longer. Now, we'll go ahead and pour this mixture into our machine. This is going to take roughly about 20 to 30 minutes. So we will come back to check on it and see how it's doing. Now that our gelato has started, we'll come back to our soup pot and just give it a quick stir. The onions look nice and translucent, which is what you want. And we'll come back over here and then chop our carrots. I am going to go ahead and peel these carrots first. It's not always necessary to peel the carrots, but a lot of times when you're using them in soup, if you don't peel them, they tend to turn a little bit dark on the outside. Now on these large carrots, you are going to have to cut them in half. We'll start with cutting the ends off and then cutting the larger ends. Then the next thing I would do is to cut the carrot in half, and then in half again right where the thickest part is. Then we're going to lay our vegetables flat. You don't want to be cutting something that's rolling around, so make sure you have it flat. Go ahead and line them up, and that makes it a lot easier. And then we'll cut these, say about a little less than a ½ inch thick. Okay, now we can go ahead and add the carrots to the pot as well. All right, I think our water looks good now. We can go ahead and add our macaroni. I did already salt the water. I'd like to give it a little bit of a stir just so that they don't stick together. And we'll let those boil. That's going to take about 7 minutes. I'll show you how to cut up our Swiss chard. Now with the colored stems like this, there are tricolored Swiss chard. This is the red Swiss chard. There's also the white Swiss chard. With any colored Swiss chard, the stems are pretty tough, so I would recommend cutting those off. The easiest way to do that is fold the chard just like this, take your knife and go ahead and just cut along the stem like that. And that removes the stem nicely. Then we could take it and just rough chop the chard. Now, it doesn't have to be in really small pieces because once it gets inside the pot, it's going to shrink up just like spinach. If you've ever done that before, it seems like you have so much and then it shrinks right down. We'll set our Swiss chard aside for now. And we'll come back over here and give our pot a stir. Okay, now we are going to add our chicken stock. I'm going to be adding about 8 cups of chicken stock. At this point, we could turn our heat up. Now let's go over here and we'll chop our tomatoes. The easiest way to chop the tomatoes would be to drain out the liquid first. You could either drain the liquid into a bowl or you can just drain it directly into the pot. So if you just give it a little bit of a squeeze and try and squeeze the tomatoes and get most of the juice out of them, it'll be a lot easier to chop. I'm going to use a different kind of cutting board for this, just because there is a lot of juice in the tomatoes. And on our tomatoes, we can just rough chop the tomatoes. They don't have to be really small. All right, now we'll add those to our soup. We're also going to add some zucchini and parsley to our soup. And we only need 1 zucchini and about 1/3 cup of chopped parsley. We'll cut each end off and then cut our zucchini in half, and then in quarters, and then cut it about 1/2 inch thick. We're going to keep all the vegetables roughly the same size in this soup. That way they'll cook evenly. Next, we'll chop up some parsley. If it comes in a nice tight bunch like this, it's relatively easy to chop. You just have to drag your knife across the top of it, and that will get out mostly the leaves. You'll get a few stems here and there, but we'll chop those off in a minute. Just put it in a nice tight compact bunch like this, and just rough chop it to begin with. And again, we just need about 1/3 of a cup. All right, let's add our parsley in. The next thing we want to do is add our beans. I am using red kidney beans for this dish. If you have a favorite bean you'd like to use, you can substitute that as well. Make sure that when you use your beans that you drain them off. There's a thick liquid inside the beans, and you want to make sure that that's drained away. I'm using 2 cans of beans. Just rinse those really well. Make sure all that liquid is gone, and then we'll add that to our soup. Now we could take our Swiss chard, give it a stir, and then add the Swiss chard. It looks like a lot of greens and a lot of Swiss chard that you're adding, but this reduces down into a very small amount. We're going to go ahead and put our lid on it and let it simmer for about 5 to 7 minutes. Now we have our macaroni here. We want to drain that. We're not going to add the macaroni to the soup. That we're going to add separately. What we're going to do is once we get our bowls set out, then we will add the macaroni to the bowls. Now the reason we're doing this is because if we were to add the macaroni to the soup and we had some leftover soup, for instance, and you'd want to save that in your refrigerator overnight, then all of the liquid will be absorbed into the macaroni and you'll have hardly any soup the next morning and really large macaroni. So we will add that separately. All right, our soup is finished, so we'll set that aside for now, and then we'll get started on our risotto. Turn your pan on to about medium-low heat, and to it we're going to add a tablespoon of olive oil and also a tablespoon of butter. Now the butter is going to give your risotto a lot of flavor, and by adding it with the olive oil, it'll keep the butter from burning. Next, we'll want to chop up our onion. We can use the same technique we used before. If you want to leave the root end attached, you can. Otherwise, we'll just chop it in half lengthwise. Now this time we're going to be chopping our onion very finely. It will not be diced. So we'll want to come across the onion and chop very thinly. Then line them up, come back across, and chop fine. Let's get that cut up just a little bit more. Now on this, when we cook our onions for our risotto, we're not trying to caramelize or brown our onions. We're simply just trying to get the onions translucent. We'll go ahead and add our onion. Okay, we'll go ahead and saute the onions here for a bit. That already smells good. Once our onions are looking pretty translucent, then we can go ahead and add our rice. I'm using arborio rice to make this risotto. There are other types of rice that you can use, but basically it's a short grain rice. And this makes for a really good textured risotto and a nice creamy texture. You wouldn't want to use a long grain rice. So make sure that it's a short grain rice, and in this case I am using the arborio rice. I'm adding 2 cups of arborio rice to this. Now at this point we want to make sure that every single grain is coated. So let's mix it around very well. Each one needs to be coated in the olive oil and the butter. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add some white wine. Now we want to make sure that we use a dry white wine. I'm going to be using a Sauvignon Blanc. We're going to add just about 1 cup of wine. While the wine is absorbing into the rice, we're going to make sure that we have our stock very hot. Place your stock somewhere close to where you'll be making the risotto. That way it's easy to spoon in. And we also want to have our stock pretty warm. We don't want to add cold stock to our risotto because that will slow down the cooking time. I have about 5 cups of stock here. This is a homemade chicken stock that I'm using. You can use the kind that's in the carton, that's fine. Now if you were to run out of stock, then what I would do is just substitute water. But I've made this recipe many times, and about 5 cups of stock is about right. Now the key here in figuring out when to add your liquid is knowing just when it starts to feel a little bit sticky on your pan. It's starting to do that a little bit over here. Then you know that it's safe to add your liquid. Don't do it beforehand though. Now it's starting to stick a little, so I'll go ahead and add a ladle of liquid. With each addition, you'll want to add about 1/2 cup to 3/4 cup of liquid. Now what gives the risotto its creamy texture is the constant stirring. And again, we'll want to wait till some of this liquid has evaporated before we add our next addition of liquid. Okay, we'll leave this for just a moment and then we'll go check on our gelato. Our chocolate gelato is all finished. We'll take the lid off. What I like to do is pre-chill a container that I'm going to put it into. Wow, that looks nice and rich. Now normally gelato is served at a warmer temperature than our traditional American ice cream would be, but I still like to go ahead and put it in the freezer just to firm it up a bit. But serving it right now at this consistency would just be fine. Now that our gelato is in the freezer, we're going to finish off our risotto. If you've ever purchased saffron in the store, you'll know that it's very expensive. And it's very expensive because it has to be hand harvested. It comes from a crocus flower. And each one of these needs to be picked by hand. We only need a little bit to give it that beautiful color. I'm going to put it in a pile over here and I'm just going to lightly chop it. Just to get the threads a little bit smaller. Next, I'm going to add it to my risotto. And at this point, we want to add about a ladle full of our stock. Now add your saffron just when you're down to about the last 2 ladles. and that'll give it enough time to color up our rice. Now once you're getting close to finishing up the risotto, you'll want to try it. We don't want to get to the point where we've added too much liquid and it's mushy all the way through. There should be just a slight chew in the very center of the grain. I'm going to go ahead and give it a try now. It's almost there. We've got to cook it just a little bit more. And I think I'll go ahead and add one more ladle of liquid. Okay, at this point, we're going to turn our heat off, cover our pan, and set it aside, and we'll get started on our chicken piccata. Okay, we've set our risotto aside. Now we're going to start our chicken piccata. What we're going to do is I placed a nonstick pan. I'm going to put it over medium heat. If you don't have a nonstick pan, that's okay. It makes it easier if you have one. If you have a regular stainless steel pan, go ahead and heat it up, and don't add your oil until your pan is hot, and that'll help make your pan non-stick. We've got two pretty large chicken breasts here. We're going to take them and then we're going to cut them horizontally. They're really thick, so we want to make sure that we cut them in half this way so it makes it a lot easier to pound them out. And we'll take our mallet and just gently pound these out. Concentrate more on the higher portions of the chicken, because what we're trying to do here is get the chicken to be about the same thickness so it cooks evenly throughout. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add some kosher salt to season these. Kosher salt is great to use for cooking because again it has a very clean taste and there's no anti-caking agents in it. We're going to use fresh ground pepper. Then we're going to also add a little bit of thyme to this. And the thyme leaves are very small, so if you just pull it off the stem, that's fine. You don't need to chop them. We're going to add about a 1/4 cup of flour to a plate and use this to dredge our chicken. Just spread that out just a little bit. Now our pan is nice and hot. Let's go ahead and add our olive oil to it. We're adding about 3 tablespoons. And then we'll take our chicken pieces and just lightly dredge them in the flour. Go ahead and shake off the excess. And what we're trying to do here is get a nice crisp crust going on the outside of the chicken. Remember earlier when I mentioned having a really tender and juicy piece of chicken? You can do that as long as you form a crust on it. So once you get all the chicken pieces in the pan, just let them sit there. If you start moving the food around too quickly, that's when it starts to shed water and it doesn't have a chance to form that crust. And the crust is what seals in all the juices. Okay, I'm going to turn my heat up just slightly. Okay, our chicken's been sauteing for about a couple minutes now, so we'll want to just take a little peek at the underside. It's looking good, but I want it to go just a little bit longer. We want to see a little bit more browning on that. Once we have it lightly browned, we'll turn over the pieces and brown the other side as well. Now these pieces of chicken are relatively thin, so they'll cook pretty quickly. Okay, our chicken is all finished and it looks really good. It's got a nice golden brown crust on that. We'll take these out and reserve them on a plate. And then we'll begin the process of making the sauce. Now the important thing to remember here when you are making the sauce is not to wash this pan. There's a whole bunch of brown bits in the pan that have caramelized, and we want to keep those in there because that's going to add a lot of flavor to our sauce. So to this pan, we're going to add about a 1/2 cup of white wine. And again, I'm using the Sauvignon Blanc. Once you've added the wine, you can go ahead and turn your heat up and just move your spatula around, scraping up all of the brown bits. And now we are going to add a bit of lemon juice. If you like your sauce more tart, then go ahead and add extra lemons. This is about 1.5 tablespoons of lemon juice. The next thing we're going to add is capers. If you're not familiar with capers, these actually come from a Mediterranean plant, caper bush, and these are the flower buds. Usually you'll find them in the store, they're in a brine. What you should do is go ahead and measure out what you need and then rinse them out. Now our heat is on pretty high, and what we want to do is to reduce this liquid down to about half. Once our liquid is reduced, that's when we will finish the sauce by adding cold butter. Okay, our sauce is reduced to about half now. I'm going to go ahead and set this aside. And now is when we're going to finish off our risotto. Remember, we took it to a point where it was almost finished cooking, but not quite. So let's heat our stock back up again. And this is actually a very common practice in restaurants. A lot of times when risotto is ordered, it takes a very long time to make, so they're not going to start from scratch. They might cook it till about 75% done. Store it in the refrigerator. When an order comes in, then they'll finish it off. And let's just give it a little bit of a stir. Now at this point, what you also want to test for is flavor. So if you feel like there's enough salt in your risotto, then we'll leave it as it is. The addition of the Parmesan cheese will be adding a little more salt to the dish. So we don't want to over salt it at this point. Add some stock to it. You can also make your risotto thicker or more runny. It just depends on your personal taste. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to turn the heat off. I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of cold butter. And I'm just going to use probably about 1/2 cup of Parmesan cheese in this. Now, of course, Parmesan cheese is delicious and it's a big part of risotto, so if you want to add more, that's fine too. And now we're ready to plate our risotto. That concludes our cooking lesson for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I encourage you to try some of these recipes sometime soon. I think you'll find that they're very easy to do and the results are quite impressive. If you would like a copy of the recipe, send me a request at info@forkandknifecreations.com. If you'd like more information on my in-home cooking classes, then please send me an email or visit my website at www.forkandknifecreations.com. I'm Mayumi Tavalero. Thanks for spending part of your day with me, and I hope to be cooking with you soon.